part 2 of interview with Roger A. Howard. So Roger, when you were overseas, and you said that the biggest problem was the monotony of it, what did you guys do for entertainment when you were off duty or for your downtime?
Write letters. We did have the newspaper, the Stars and Stripes, that would come in a couple of times a week or something like that. That would keep you up to date. Some of us would get newspapers sent from home. And you find out what was going on in the war. But
Did you find out more about the war from the papers at home?
from the paper back home, yeah. I think some of those things that Pam gave you were, I don't know whether they were newspaper articles. Now, my father used to cut out anything they had about the 78th Division, and while I was overseas, he had had a heart attack, so he was bedridden for 4 or 5 weeks, and then that was his hobby, I guess.
Did you see any USO shows?
No, but we had USO girls come by once in a while, 2 girls to 100 men, but it was just good to see somebody that could speak English. And they'd serve coffee and donuts. They'd come up and serve.
What did you think of the officers?
This going on the record.
Yes, this is. So.
No, we had a Captain Galat who you'd go through hell for. He was great. He was a soldier's officer, and a battery executive officer, Lieutenant Pasinger, was great. He knew his job, but he was strict but fair. There was a Lieutenant Schmidt, who was a former professional football player from the Baltimore area someplace, and he was good. He had come up through the ranks, and it was what they call a Mustang. Had come up through the Army, and he ended up as a first lieutenant, but he didn't get along with the new captain. I guess they kind of kept their fights we didn't know about, but the captain had him shipped out to another outfit, and he survived the war all right. He got a Silver Star, I believe, and stayed in the Army and was killed in Korea later, I understand. We had 2 second lieutenants. One was first lieutenants. One was a artillery flying officer. He was observation, Lieutenant Spires, and Lieutenant Rasmussen, and they were both good. Now, Rasmussen claimed he was the oldest second lieutenant. He had been a second lieutenant longer than any second lieutenant in the Army. He'd get to the point where it'd get to be a promotion, and he'd mess up something, and they kept him as a second lieutenant. But he was a soldier's officer. Spires was good. Spires, I think, originally came from Princeton and survived the war. He was a flyer, and the colonel grounded him and made him a forward observer for some reason. They didn't let us know all this. But for the most part, then the captain we had that replaced Captain Jones was one that should never have been an officer. Foul-mouthed and drunk on duty most of the time, and every time a shell landed, he would be in a foxhole someplace. Somebody said that the report came that he was the only survivor in his battery at Anzio, and he was not. But for the most part, the officers were good. As long as you did your job, they would go along with you. And of course, I had Colonel Smith in the ASTPs. He was.
What did you think of your fellow soldiers?
Oh, then we were close. It's like.
Well, now you said your unit trained together, and then you went with your artillery pieces together. So I mean, you worked together, you trained together, you fought together. You must have become pretty close during the war.
Yeah, during the war we were close. And you were going to keep close touch after the war, but you came back and other things came along. I went back to school. Right after the war, Junior LeClaire came down from Vermont to visit me, and Bill O'Shaughnessy came on from up in New York State, and we spent a few days together. And you'd send Christmas cards. And then gradually, in those days you could send a Christmas card for 3 cents. Now it's 45.
Did you stay in touch with any of your buddies?
Yeah, just one. And I lost track of him for a while right after the war. A fellow by the name of Roy Harrison. We call him Yardbird. And he was a character. He came from Arkansas. And he had the Arkansas Southern wit and so forth. And he and I, well, we played on the softball team together and we played on the football team together, the battery football team. And Yardbird got wounded at the bridge, but came back. He wasn't a serious wound. It was a leg wound a piece of shrapnel. And we, and years later, we had this division newsletter that would be sent out, a magazine actually. And Yardbird went back, well, it was a funny story. He got out of the Army in December of '45. And he said he was stay home for 3 weeks and then he'd go to work. Well, he worked for the Arkansas Power and Light Company or something down there. And he said after Christmas, he went out in the month of January and he went back to work for the Arkansas Power and Light Company. He said, I ended up digging holes to put poles in. And he said at the end of the month, he picked up his pay and he said something like, he said it was a few dollars less than I'd been making in the Army. So he said, I re-enlisted. And he went in and he became a career soldier. He went through Korea and came back. And after he got out of the war, he picked up this newspaper, the division paper, and found my name in it, and he contacted me. So we kept in touch for a while, and we went to a reunion in Fishkill, New York, and that's after he was out of the Army, so it was either 20 or 30 years later, and it was just more or less recently. And I kept in touch with him, and he passed away, 5 years ago, I guess. And that's about the only one that most of us aren't left. You know, that's true. Although during the war, we only had one in our battalion, one in our battery was killed in combat.
And where was that?
That was one of the first days we were up there. He was outside of Lammersdorf someplace, and Klaus, his name was, Corporal Klaus. He was a forward observer, and the lieutenant that was in charge, Gracie, was wounded at the same time. The same shell got him. There were 3 of them that got hit. Mandaloop was wounded and got, not seriously, but seriously enough to be sent home, sent back stateside. Gracie had a back injury and was crippled for the rest of his life. He was in a wheelchair, and Klaus got a head wound and was killed. So that was about the only real casualties we had. We had Purple Hearts where they'd been hit by shrapnel and stuff like that, but nothing really.
When the war was ending, where were you when you heard that the war was over?
I was in Whippotal, and I think there's a picture someplace of I don't know whether it was VJ Day or VE Day, when it was ended over in Europe, and then I was actually on guard duty when the war itself ended, after they dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then but up until that time, well, one other thing was, when the war ended in Europe, we were supposed to go over to the Pacific Our division was slated for the invasion of Japan, someplace. But we all said they better not send us through the States because a few of us will get lost. I was planning to go up to northern Maine and grow blueberries or something. We said we were fugitives from the law of averages. But we were figuring that we would go over to Japan, probably someplace, and for the invasion of Japan. But fortunately, the war ended within a couple of months, really.
Now, when the war ended, you said you had, because you didn't have enough points to ship back immediately. How long did you stay as actually an occupation?
Okay, the war ended. The war in Europe ended in May. The war itself ended in September, and I shipped out at the middle of January. So it's October, November, December, and part of January.
So that period of time, what were your exact duties? What did you do as an occupation?
Cleaned trucks, cleaned the howitzers.
Because I was saying you couldn't have too much use for your howitzer.
No, but you had to go on inspections, and they had to be spotless. And also the division was slated for duty in Berlin. So you had to be up there with, as long as you're out in the field, you didn't have a lot of high brass around. But the minute you got into Berlin, then you had to have everything spit and polish and so forth. But our outfit, or the 307th Field Artillery, never did go to Berlin. They went up to Bremerhaven. And I don't know what they did up there, loaded ships or something. But and then they were deactivated that summer. The 78th was deactivated sometime shortly after that. But
were you awarded any medals or citations?
No. Oh, just the 3 battle stars, that the 3 combat, the Battle of the Bulge in Central Europe, and
well, there were 3 big battles that you were in, Roger.
yeah, but
now, when you finally did get your points and you came back to the United States after your long journey of being sick, where did you land?
we landed in New York, and
Were you immediately discharged?
yeah, we get in the middle of January, I think, probably about the 15th or 16th of January, and we were at Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, and probably 2 or 3 days, and then they shipped us back up to Fort Devens, and that was, well, I would say less than a week. We weren't in Devens too long. They gave you new uniforms so that you looked good. I remember there was a Sergeant Gardner and myself went down to the NCO club, and we were looking for a real mouthy PFC that when we were inducted had given us a hard time, and we were trying to find them. It was something, Stretch was saying something, we'd take them down to the pond, break the ice, and throw them in. But of course, we never did find them. We found a couple of the NCOs that were there, still at Fort Devens 3 years later, just bringing in the inductees. But other than that, I think it was 3 days. Then they checked our medical records. They gave us a pay, tried to talk us into re-enlisting, and discharged us.
Where did you go right after discharge?
I went home to Melrose.
Which wasn't very far for you to have
No,
to
it was
travel.
about 20 miles.
What was your homecoming like?
All of my folks met me at the Jackson Gate at Fort Devens, so I wouldn't have to take a bus into Boston and then out. And they drove me home. And the house looked great. First time I'd seen it in 3 years as a civilian. I think I had a chip on my shoulder. Thought the world owed me a living. I knew vaguely that I wanted to go back to college, but I figured I'd get out in February, I guess, the end of January, and I would have a nice vacation and try to get back into college sometime in September. And so I'd have the winter, the spring and summer to do nothing, really. And they had in those days what they call the 5220 Club. And that is a part of the GI Bill, that you were assured $20 a week. Actually, it was unemployment. You had to check into the unemployment office and every week and sign an affidavit that you hadn't worked, and you'd get a check for $20. Well, you look around for jobs in those days, if you could get a job right out of the service making maybe 25 to $26 a week for a 45-hour week. So you didn't have to be a rocket scientist to figure, why should I work 40 hours a week for $5? So you'd ride the 5220 Club. Well, you're looking back on it, you're not too proud of it. The government was trying to make a bunch of bums out of us, I think. But anyway, went down, and I, along with the rest of them, we'd go down one day a week to Malden and sign up at the 5220 Club. Finally, they came along and they asked me about a job. They offered me a job, and I don't want to work. Well, you had to go and be interviewed, and it was one of those relaxed interviews that you didn't want the job anyway. So, but I was going to go back to school, and they said, you better sign up, a lot of vets coming back, so you better go to the college. Well, the one thing that I wanted to do, I wanted to stay around Boston. So I went to, I'd go over to Tufts. I figured that was close enough, so went over and was interviewed at Tufts. Now, Tufts had a lot of their own returning veterans, and no way were they going to take me, and particularly with my academic record that I had. So the admissions officer at Tufts, he was a colonel. Why don't you go back to Bates? So I went back to Bates the next day.
To Bates on the GI Bill?
Yeah, I went back to Bates. Now, this was the end of February. I went back to Bates to sign up for September. Well, at Bates, they had the Navy V-12 program going. So they postponed the opening of the college until the middle of November, I think. So I went back, and I figured they'd start the second semester in January sometime, middle of January. And come to find out, they had just started the second semester, and I spoke to the dean, and unfortunately he remembered me from 43, 42, and why, give me 3 reasons why I should take you back. And I told him, I'm not a mixed up kid anymore, and I'm 23 years old and so forth, and got my feet in the ground, I know where I'm going. And I get that from all the veterans. Well, anyway, he said, if you can come back, this was on a Friday, if you can get back here on Monday, the semester was a week old, he says, I'll take you back in. He said, I won't guarantee anything in September because we're filled up. So I had no choice. So I came back, and there went my relaxed fall and summer. So I did go back and started in the middle of, the 1st of September, 1st of March, middle of March, I guess. And that's where I met my wife at that time. And they gave me BU credit, which made me, instead of a first semester freshman, a second semester, I was a second semester senior, second semester sophomore. When I finished that, I started my junior year. So it worked out well.
What degree did you graduate with?
I had a Bachelor of Arts, majored in history and government, and minor in economics. And like most of the veterans, figured I wanted to teach and coach. And Bev and I were planning to get married when she graduated, which was the following June. And so she wanted me to go into business and make some money. And I still kind of had it in the back of my mind I'd want to teach, but I went back and I got a job in Boston selling paint, putty, chemicals, and not making any money. And I found out after about 8 months there that I just didn't like looking at four walls, and I wasn't going anyplace. And so I picked up the paper and got an ad in the paper for a teaching job out in Michigan, which they said paid well. Now was what our education instructor at Bates in our senior year, a lot of us were graduating and we're getting offers, teaching offers then, and what should we consider as a starting pay? And this was 1948, and times have changed, but he said, if they offer you $1,200 a year, turn it down. If they offer you $1,500, take it. Well, I said I was making more money than that as a high school senior driving a milk truck for H.P. Hood. Summers, I was making more than that. Now I got a college degree and I'm X number of years older and I'm going to make less. Well, anyway, the job out in Michigan paid about a third more than they were paying in New England or in Massachusetts at that time for beginning teachers. And I was out there for 4.5 years, and then came back and got a job teaching in Brookline for 32 years.
What subject did you teach?
I taught history, U.S. history and world history, and after I'd coached freshman hockey and then coached track and cross country. And then my wife says I retired on full pay after about 10 years and became a guidance counselor.
Roger, how would you say that your military experience influenced your life?
I grew up. I had no idea what I wanted to do. You know, you take the easiest way out. And of course, that semester at Bates before the war, or before I went into the service, you knew you were going in, so you didn't take the courses too seriously, and as a result, the marks showed it. But
did you join any veterans organizations after you got out of the service?
no, just a division, 78th Division Veterans Association.
Are you still a member of that?
Yeah, but I just got a notice a month ago that they're folding up. There's not that many of us left, so they've got 2 more division newspaper or magazines to come out, and then they're disbanding.
Wow. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell me about that we haven't covered thus far?
Gosh, I don't know. I think that's pretty...
You know, when I leave, you're going to think of a lot of other stories.
Yeah.
Are there any other memorable experiences?
Yeah, probably one of the... It was after the war, and it was... we're looking for... going through sections of woods, looking for soldiers, German soldiers that we were trying to pick up. And I was leading, maybe 8 or 9 men going through the woods, and not really expecting to find much. And we came into this, well, actually it was a box canyon type of thing. And at the end of the canyon, you looked up and there was a cave dug into the side of the wall. And they had a white flag hanging out in front of the cave, but everybody hung a sheet out over there after the war. You know, they were surrendering. So I sent three or four on each side of the wall of the canyon going up, and I went up the front to see if there was anything in there. And as I was coming up, the family came out. There was an older man, an older woman, and then a younger woman and a couple of small kids. And I came up, and they start the usual thing, German soldiers around, and then they started giving me no soldiers and so forth. And I says, yeah, and you got a brother-in-law in Chicago and so forth type of thing. And about that time, inside the cave, there was a noise. And the young girl turned around and ran into the cave. Well, I figured that, you know, your first impulse was that there was somebody in there with a machine gun. And why he hadn't opened up on me earlier, I didn't think at the time. But I was carrying a grenade hooked onto my shoulder patch, which I pulled. Now I got a live grenade in my hand, and by all rights, according to the book and everything, I should have lobbed it into the cave. And for some reason I didn't. And I threw it up above the cave and yelled to hit the ground. And I hit the ground. And the girl came out carrying a baby. And I've had nightmares about that many years afterwards. And as I said, I didn't know whether I could have handled it if I'd thrown that in.
Wow.
But that was...
Well, thank God you didn't.
Yeah. Why I didn't, I don't know. And the other stories, oh, I had a lot of... As I say, you remember the good stories. You don't remember the... I know one of the first days that I was in Devon's, I think I mentioned the fact that I pulled guard duty, guarding the German prisoners and so forth. Well, I had no idea what military life was like, and I was outside the stockade, cold, the wind was blowing down from Mount Washington, and so I got in the lee of an old shed they had there out of the breeze, and lighted up a cigarette and was sitting down, and I had just had shots, typhoid and tetanus shot, and I was kind of dopey and sleepy and so forth, and kind of dozing off, and I noticed there was somebody standing in front of me, and I don't know, he had something up on his shoulder and so forth, and he says, well, son, how do you like the Army? And well, I don't like it too much. And how long you been in? I'm 3 days or something. And he said, well, look, first of all, put out that cigarette. And he says, I'm only a colonel, and I don't much care what you're doing because you're not going to be around here very long. But he said, there are a lot of second lieutenants in this area that make life miserable for you. So he said, my advice is to keep out of sight.
Did you take his advice?
Yeah, that was the best thing. That was one, and I can't think of many more that would, but that was some of the good stuff that you can remember.
Well, Roger, I'd like to thank you for your service to our country, and thank you for your interview.
Well, thank you. That's my pleasure.